CHART, the Council of Hotel and Restaurant Trainers. For those not familiar, CHART serves the multi-unit hospitality training community, providing annual conferences, live regional training forums in a number of cities, articles and blogs, and many other resources like the webinar series we're here for today. So welcome. A little bit of housekeeping. This webinar deck will be distributed electronically with the feedback survey post-webinar, and this webinar is being recorded for future use. So I'm Donna Herbal, proud CHART member and Vice President of Training and Culture Development for Perkins and Marie Callender's Restaurants. Joining the conversation today are industry experts Colby Hutchinson, the voice of guest evangelist, I love that by the way, for one of the world's largest hotel chains, Best Western. Colby will be sharing insights from the lodging side of the business. And Melissa Doolan-Caney. Melissa's the Executive Director Business Development for TDN2K, translating data into knowledge. TDN2K is a CHART partner organization, providing metrics and performance insights into sales and performance drivers, human capital management, and the relationship between the two. Melissa is an expert in the trends driving our industry and human capital application and best practices from the restaurant side of the business. So a quick note, for those of you who have attended webinars previously, there are some interactive elements in your web screen, such as raising your hand. That would be just for exercise. As mentioned, all attendees are on mute for this webinar. But if you have questions, comments, or feedback, please use the questions bank on the right side of your toolbar, or certainly we're also monitoring and providing feedback through the chat communications. So Colby and Melissa, glad to have you as guides for our conversation. Here's the roadmap for today's webinar. We'll start with the state of the industry, share insights on current and emerging workforce trends, and finally, take that background and some key findings from the CHART and TDN2K partner trends and training survey results to share some best practices and updates that training professionals can consider and act on. The trends and training results were recently compiled and shared at the CHART San Diego conference last month, and key information has just been made publicly available this week. So this is hot off the presses stuff. So let's check in with a short poll to get your perspective on the state of the industry as we prepare to open up the conversation. So thank you for joining. For those of you who are on, kind of just want to take the temperature of the room. How do you feel the next year will be for your company's performance?
Donna, looks like we have about a third of our people voted so far. Looks like we're up to about 65, 70%. We'll give it just another second or two and then close our poll and show the results.
There is a portion who's saying, and I don't know who Donna is, one of the webinar hosts. So really interested in what our current perspective is compared to some of the survey results from quarters 1 and 2 this year.
All right, looks like about 90% have submitted their answers. Let's close it and launch the results.
Very nice. So Colby, Melissa, share with us a little bit about what we think here and what's going on from your perspective.
Well, for our poll results, it looks like about 43%. I think the only view is up. 34% of our attendees here on the webinar are going to keep the wheels on the track. 17% think it's going to be a bumpy ride, and unfortunately 6% have no idea, Donna.
And I appreciate your honesty.
So that's great, and I love working with CHART because they're the most positive people in the industry, and I love seeing that so many of you have an outlook that's really positive. What I'm going to share with you today is a little bit of information from Black Box Intelligence and People Report, just to give you perspective of TDN2K. TDN2K, as Donna alluded, stands for Transforming Data into Knowledge. And we take data from thousands and thousands of restaurant units and millions of employees that submit data to us on a weekly and monthly basis and are able to provide data in the restaurant industry. So I'm excited to share some of these insights. The first one you're seeing here is comp sales growth is slowing down. You see that big gap between Q1, between average guest check and traffic. Traffic has just kind of really been our struggle as an industry. And the way we're making up for it is average guest check. So as we continue to see traffic decline, we're seeing guest check go up. So when you think about that, why is that? Why is traffic so slow? Well, we're in a growing industry. And Colby, if you mind changing the slide, you're seeing that in 2016, last year, the net restaurant unit growth overall was about 2.1%. So we're continuing to grow, and you see that the darling of the industry right now is fast casual, growing at 8.7%. So if you're scratching your head and wondering where is our traffic going, not only is our industry growing, but we're also seeing competition from so many different areas, including Amazon, meal that's ready to eat orders, convenience stores. All of them are kind of amping up their game with meal plans. So we're really feeling the heat. Now when we transition over to the next slide on what's the size of the prize, the people that are really, really doing it well, what are we seeing in differences when we start to look at the People Report data in comparison to sales and traffic data from Black Box Intelligence? There's a big difference in retention and hourly and management when it comes to our top performers in Black Box Intelligence. So those top performers have 26% better retention of hourly and 14% better retention in management. And when you look at their comp sales and traffic, which is something we're all struggling with, they have 2% higher comp sales and 3% higher traffic than average. So this is really real money. So as sad as some of this information is, when you're looking at sales and traffic, there are real winners that are doing really, really well. And a lot of those are really focused on the people side of the business, which is great news for us in training. So now I'm going to fast forward and talk a little bit about what that means from a customer satisfaction piece. We also have a great product called White Box Social Intelligence. We track over 600 restaurant brands and what our customers really talking about. And what we're finding is that when you look at food, beverage, service, ambiance, intent to return, and value, the thing that is mattering the most on intent to return, which is really driving up traffic, is that service score. So it's interesting, when I ask operators this question, a lot of them think that it's food or beverage or value. All of those are really important. We have to stay on our game at all times. But the service piece, which is what we can directly impact, is really what's impacting that intent to return. So
Melissa,
Colby,
just briefly, if I could, I'm so sorry. Just had a couple questions come in as you were talking about sectors. For those that aren't familiar on the previous slide, can you just give us some examples of who we're talking about in those sectors for your comparison, so maybe brands can find themselves for comparison?
Sure. So in fast casual, we're talking about companies that are like a Chipotle. You're talking about a Zoe's Kitchen. Fine dining, we're looking at the Palm. We're looking at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. Quick service, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, McDonald's. And then family dining, it is like a Golden Corral, an IHOP, a Denny's. Casual dining, a TGI Fridays. We're also seeing Chili's there. And then upscale casual is like a Cheesecake Factory or a Lazy Dog. So I hope that helps in perspective of who we're talking about in those specific statements.
We appreciate it. Thanks so much, Melissa.
You're welcome. All right, Colby, let's hear about the hotels and the impact.
I always love getting together with some of the gang at Chart because obviously we're all in the hospitality arena, but there's some slight differences between hotels and restaurants. You know, I think the restaurants are maybe the bleeding edge of our economy, and hotels are right behind them. I'm blown away that we keep hitting historic highs in our industry. So right now, the hotel industry as a whole in the U.S. has never been healthier than it is. We're running at 87 months of positive RevPAR growth. That is like the financial number that we look at in hotels. For all the restaurateurs here on the call, think of RevPAR like revenue per available seat in your hotel. It's how much revenue you're generating by all the opportunities you have to generate. So it takes into account any rooms that go unsold. And we are at one of the longest clips we've ever had in the history of our industry in hotels at 87 months. PKF, one of the companies that we look at as kind of one of the analytic companies who studied hotels for 70 years, has said they've never seen growth over almost 90 months like they've seen right now. Collectively, as an industry right now, our average daily rate for restaurants, that would be kind of like the average guest check, is $128, which is at an all-time high. So the numbers are looking good. They continue to look good. We continue to beat records. However, I'm going to go Paul Harvey on everybody for just a moment. Here is the rest of the story. A lot of the industry experts are predicting that we may be approaching a cycle peak if we haven't already crossed over it. So hotels, very similar to restaurants, work in cycles. And we've been on a very long recovery after that deep decline in the Great Recession. People are projecting that we may start to see decrease in occupancy, decrease in that average rate. So some of those successes may end around 2018. Or maybe even later this year in 2017. If we look at what the latest forecasts are, and this is hot off the presses as of January 2017 from Smith Travel, we can see that we're already starting to see some declines. The first that we've seen in almost 9 years in the hotel space. We can also see that all of the financial performance, that RevPAR, is really being fueled by increases in our average daily rate. So it's not that we have more people staying at our hotels, it's that we're charging a little bit more for the rooms that we are selling. And I think I've heard some comparisons in the restaurant world. There's maybe not as many people sitting in the restaurants. We're just upping our average checks. And then the other interesting thing here is that we can see that our upper mid-scale and our upscale segments are really the ones that aren't as performing as well financially right now. 70% of all of the development that's happened over the last 7 years has come in these two chain scales. So there's a lot of hotel openings that is affecting it. Now, obviously, we've got some of the logos here, so you get an idea of what we're talking about for the hotels. We call these chain scales very similar to what Melissa covered with the different scales of the restaurants that she referred to there. Of note is Drury here. They've won the J.D. Power Award in the upper mid-scale for 13 years running. And I'm going to transition to J.D. Power real quick because this really shows us the impact of a satisfied guest and just how important that guest satisfaction is. Melissa touched on it a little bit from a service standpoint, but what we're looking at here is the average score of the hotel industry. If a guest is highly satisfied, if they have a medium satisfaction level, or if they have a low satisfaction level. So this is really that difference between an 8 and a 9 in the industry, and you can see that the green column significantly outperforms everybody else. Just moving them from an 8 to a 9, from an okay satisfaction to highly satisfied, means that the definite repurchase goes up over 40%. The definite recommend goes up over 40%, and the number of recommendations actually doubles. So interestingly enough, in the J.D. Power survey, one of the questions they ask is, were you greeted with a smile? And a third of guests say they are only greeted sometimes. And if that is the case, their satisfaction level is 107 points lower than those who say they're greeted with a smile always. So that smile at the front desk, that service at the front desk, both check-in and check-out, is maybe one of the difference makers in taking somebody between a medium satisfaction level and a high satisfaction level. Here you can see satisfaction by chain scale, just how happy guests are. And again, this is J.D. Power just reporting a few weeks ago. We can see that the satisfaction increases as we go up in the scale. So again, one of those indicators that even though people are paying higher prices as we move up in the scale from economy to luxury, the overall satisfaction is higher. The value for price paid is perceived as higher by guests as they move up this scale. And overall, they're happier with their experiences, even though they're paying more. So I think that highlights exactly what Melissa touched on. And I think to kind of capstone out what we're seeing here in the industry trends, it's all about having a good product. That is now price of entry. That is the expectation of guests that are walking through the door. Winners in the marketplace, regardless of the chain scale or regardless of what type of restaurant they're operating, will differentiate through the service they provide. So that's what the data is telling us from the hotel side. We've heard it reflected in the restaurant side as well. Let's transition into workforce trends.
Yeah, and Colby, it's just, a point of that is, I think when Colby and I started to talk to each other and share our information from industry to industry, just very, very similar in our findings. And so I think the great news in all of this, especially as trainers, is that you're seeing really clear results from profits. Which matters when we're talking to operations and really investing in that service experience. And I also wanted to thank you, Colby, too, because I shared that slide about people are happier in luxury hotels with my husband, who we're about to take a vacation with. So I appreciate you.
I'm here to help, right? I am here to help. I don't know that I could say it any better, Melissa. I think what our guests are telling us through all this data suggests that the smart investments for companies right now, make sure you have a great product that you're serving, but then it's the people who are going to make the difference. And that gives everybody on this webinar, hopefully, a bigger seat at the table. So I think that's a perfect segue into our next topic, workforce trends.
Yes. So let's talk a little bit about what we're finding on the people report side. So the first and foremost is when we start to talk about recruiting difficulty. I'm sure you talk to recruiters, you work with them hand in hand, and they're really having a tough time. So be nice to your recruiters right now. With unemployment at 4.4%, some of the lowest that we've seen in years, we're also seeing that it's much, much harder to find people to recruit from. So this is showing you something called our workforce index and people report, where we look at how hard is it to find employees. And we're seeing kind of record highs here. When Colby and I started talking about how many jobs do we need to fill in the industry, when you look at hospitality industry as a whole, we're looking at 22.6 million jobs that need to be filled. So no wonder this is really, really difficult. So when you transition that into, okay, we have people, are we keeping people? Let's look at that turnover number on the next slide. And this is for hourly turnover. We're seeing a significant increase in turnover from 2014 to 2017 year to date. This shows you rolling 12 months up to March 2017. My gut instinct is a lot of you on this call right now are taking a picture of this. Misery loves company, so you're not alone if your turnover numbers are going higher. But we're seeing really significant average turnover rates, QSR at 172.4. And we're everyone really is above that 100% line, which is pretty scary. So why are people leaving the industry? We asked that in People Report, and you start to see the reasons here. This is showing you the number 3 reasons for front of the house, back of the house, and management. Just a couple things that I wanted to point out here is that you're seeing job abandonment in front of the house and back of the house. That means that they literally are not showing up for work. And I know when we presented this at CHART, I saw a lot of people nodding their heads and going, yes, yes, yes. But there's not a lot of difference between front of the house and back of the house. Their top 3 are in different orders, but still really, really strong and solid. What I really want to point out here is management, and that you're seeing people leave for higher compensation. That is a true tell story that happens for years and years in our industry. But what we're really seeing is this poor work-life balance continue to creep up. And I think it's something in the industry we really got to pay attention to when we're competing for so many employees. And that management role is so, so important, which we'll touch upon here in another slide. So I think we have a poll right now. Is that right?
Absolutely.
So, and this really kind of segues not only into taking the temperature of what we know, but helping us evolve the conversation. So, one of the questions is really today, when is new hire turnover rate dropping in your organization? At what point do you say, yeah, if they make it this long, we kind of have them for a while? And what's kind of your critical target? Is it 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 6 months? Or is it that I have really no idea what's turnover, maybe we don't measure it here? So really kind of getting an idea of when does new hire turnover rates drop in your organization? When have we kind of made it through, we've got this new hire who is maybe at risk? How are we doing, Colby?
Don, it looks like we have about 75% of our attendees with their response. Let's give it just another second or two. I'll go ahead and close this momentarily and then launch the results for everybody to see. They're actually very interesting as I'm seeing the votes come in. I feel like I'm on American Idol.
You should be on American Idol, Colby. I'd vote you in. So really interesting. Couple of things.
Looks like about 13% say after 30 days. About 16% of our responses were after 60 days. The bulk, the biggest answer, 47% responded after 90 days. We have 22 that are lucky enough to have 6 months, and then 2% aren't sure what their turnover is.
Thank you for that. And this, I think this is really interesting. There's also a larger question that we've started asking, and this is kind of anecdotal, speaking with operators and spending time in our restaurants. As Melissa spoke to, man, it's a tough recruitment market right now for recruiters, and voluntary terminations are up. One of the questions we've kind of started asking is, are we measuring the right things? Do we believe that, we kind of have a handle on it on 90 days because we measure retention at 90 days, and maybe are we looking at that shorter horizon, or are we kind of backing up and understanding when are people leaving us? And so it was that idea that kind of brought us into this conversation with real findings, and I'll let Melissa share some background into what we really see and what that means.
Yes. So when we're tracking and people report terminations within 90 days of hire, this is to us kind of that sweet spot, right? So you've got them in 90 days, and how much turnover is happening within those first 90 days. 39% of front of the house are leaving within 90 days, and 42% of back of the house. So technically 4 out of 10 of your employees are really leaving in just 90 days. Not a lot of time to get them trained and start to work and work for your company when you got turnover numbers that high. We also are seeing 35% of managers leave within the first year. So 1 out of 3 of your managers aren't lasting a year. So this is a really tough time for our industry with these kinds of turnover numbers. And it's something that we need to really pay attention to. And that first 90 days is where we really can make an impact on our business if we can lower that. So the next
Melissa, there was a very interesting
is,
spread there on those poll results, and I think that's a little different than maybe we've seen conversationally with other people before. 22% of those poll results have to worry about the first 6 months. Just put that into context. Imagine having to worry about line staff as well as management staff over a 6-month period, and not just that 30 days or 90 days. I mean, it really puts it into a new context.
Mm-hmm.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. The other scary part is how much all of this is costing us. You think about losing 40% of your staff within the first 90 days, and then you wonder how much is that to the bottom line. We're seeing these numbers increase. This is the recent survey that we did in the cost of turnover, which has increased by a few $100s for front and back of the house, and about $1,500 for management year over year. So it is costing you about $2,200 for front of the house hourly, back of the house hourly around $2,800, and management is over $15. These are averages. So that means there's a lot more people that are investing more, and there's some that are investing less. But this is really important in a training perspective of really be able to talk these numbers with your executive team on why it's really important that you're investing in the right people and really having your operators pay attention to these numbers.
The numbers for hotels are we track a little differently. We look at line and then management rather than front of house, back of the house. And ours are actually even a little higher than this, in excess of $3,000 for line level, and I've seen as high as $30,000 for management. Or depending on the property, it could go even higher than that for full service general managers. You could be looking up in the $50,000, $60,000 range in terms of turnover costs.
So who are we hiring? Colby, I know you had some statistics that you wanted to share from us that you grabbed from the National Restaurant Association.
Very, very interesting things that we're starting to see. Obviously, hospitality has been one of those doorway career paths for many, many people. I can't tell you how many people have actually started in hospitality at either restaurants or hotels. But we found this very interesting in the latest NRA data that came out in the big study they did in 2014, that teens are entering the workforce less often. And it kind of transitions us into maybe our workforce isn't as young as it used to be. I know Donna's got some anecdotal things that she can add that we're starting to see pop up in some of the restaurants, some of the pockets.
We are. You know, one of the things that we started seeing, especially in response to increased challenges in the job market, and that kind of triggered that question about when you start talking about teens in the workforce, is it as much that more teens are or are not participating, or in some cases we do find that some restaurants have actually lowered some of their initial hire minimum age requirements. So, you know, there's definitely some interesting elements with regards to teens in the workforce.
Absolutely. So the NRA was tracking 16 to 19 years old. So think about that for a second, that the need is so big. We've started hiring 14 and 15-year-olds that aren't even in the survey.
Yeah, and Colby, just so you know, too, is that when we look at this summer and the workforce participation rate in that younger age, it is the most historically low we have ever seen. So when you look at overall how many people that we lean on in that age frame as an industry, and then you look at just the sheer number that are just choosing not to work at all, Houston, we have a problem.
So it actually brings up a great point. You know, one of the age groups that's going to have the largest percent change coming into the workforce are actually older adults who are choosing to come back as second or even third careers, who are looking for something to do or have to work. I guess it brings up a great point for all the people that are on this webinar that are responsible for planning and executing training within their organizations. When we have multi-generations in the workforce, and we have our younger generation who's starting to slide and drop in terms of the overall percentage, the older generation growing, are we tailoring our training to get the biggest impact in the right formats, in the right vehicles? Are we choosing the right types of training based on some of the changing data that's there? Might be an opportunity.
When we look at our data on the people report side, and we look at from 2014 to 2017 and the change here, what's happening is that 18 to 24, which has always been our sweet spot in our industry, has actually decreased by 5%. 25 and older has decreased by 1%. But what has increased is less than 18, and we've increased that by 6%. So that previous slide that you were sharing, Colby, about the workforce getting older, we tend to rely on those young workers. And so if we can't find them in that 18 to 24, let's just go younger. And that might not be the best answer for us as an industry when we look at scratching our heads, where are we going to find people and how are we going to fill these positions? One of the things that we are also seeing in People Report is we're seeing that counter service brands, so that's quick service and fast casual combined, are offering incentives in difficult recruiting areas ever before. So we're seeing, sign-on bonuses, we're seeing extra pay, but there's a lot going on here that hasn't happened before. So we're dealing with certain areas that are just incredibly difficult. And so we're having to amp up and do a little bit more on the compensation side, as well as other incentives that we're offering. Colby, are you finding any of that on the hotel side?
We definitely find the difficulties, and I think hotels are handling it slightly differently than hotels are. There are some hotels that do offer some incentives, paying big increases at, say, 90 days or whatever that pain point is for turnover. There are some hospitality kind of lodging companies like cruise ships that are offering sign-on bonuses now, but we're seeing a lot of companies try to outsource to go overseas with visaed workers, especially ones in big seasonal areas. So they're not finding the talent for the price that they want here, so they're going outside and bringing people in for those small seasonal pockets of high demand.
That's interesting. I like to always bring it right back to that there are companies that are doing really well here. And what we have found too is that best-in-class performers and retention have higher staffing rates. So when you look at managers per unit and hourly employees per unit, you're seeing that they're staffing more. So I think that's kind of an interesting perspective. One is probably because they're doing better, and they have higher retention rates. They're probably sales and traffic are increasing, so they need more staff. But I think it's also indicative to, are you stretching your employees too thin? One of the first things that we do when sales and traffic are down is cut labor, and that's not always the right answer, and certainly can really impact the business as a whole. Colby, I know you have some information on kind of engagement that's interesting as well.
I was very excited. My company, Best Western, went out and we kind of did a small pilot test of employee satisfaction for the staff members at our hotels. Or we created an opportunity for our independent owners and operators to learn about the satisfaction of their employees. So we partnered with one of our survey companies. And we got to see some of the roll-up results while the hotels got their individual results. And we saw a definite impact in employee satisfaction, the service that they provide, and being able to track it back through intent to recommend and some of the survey guest data that I look at. We were able to put a dollar amount to it. And you can see here on the screen that we've got the top 20% that's in this employee engagement survey represented in green. People that finished in the bottom 20% of employee satisfaction are in red. And even the bottom at 78.3% engagement, I think everybody would agree isn't bad, but here's what we found within our organization, and our average hotel is about 80 rooms, that by being able to track that difference in intent to recommend and the impact it makes in revenue, having a highly engaged staff is about $100,000 in extra in top line revenue. So this is the first empirical evidence that I've got within our organization that says engaged staff members on the line make a huge difference to the revenue.
Colby and Melissa, you've just really generated a ton of questions. And as a reminder for our listeners, at the close of our next segment on trends in training, we have reserved the back portion of our time together for deeper dives with Q&A. But there's a couple of just the statistic elements that people want a little more information on. For example, when we spoke to 80% of counter service brands were offering incentives, do we have a beat on, is that frontline managers, both?
Yes, it's all of the above. It's interesting when you're seeing frontline and back of the house, we are starting to see more incentives. It's not just enough to provide just that hourly rate. So we're seeing things like, paid meals, more flexible schedules. There's a lot more going into that, and a lot more people trying to get super creative so they can keep those employees and find those employees.
Excellent. And then just kind of forwarding a little bit further, when we talked about the correlation of retention and staffing, could we just get an understanding of what does 5.9 mean, or what does 5.5 mean?
Yes, that's a great question. So in statistics, you're taking all of it and you're combining it all. So that is 5.5 managers per unit, or 4.9 managers per unit. So I know it's not a whole number, but when you average it out, those are the numbers, and that's what that means.
And then I'll seat ahead for Q&A. But one of the questions that has come up in some of the dialogue when we talked about why managers have been leaving, the whole idea of leaving for better compensation, there is some interest in, do we know what better compensation means and how much they're leaving for? Nickels and dimes, dollars and cents, or tens of thousands? So we can ask that in Q&A, but there's a little bit of chat around what does that mean. That might be interesting, or maybe we have an additional resource at the end of our conversation for those that want to get a beat on what's going on with new hire and manager wages. Thanks so much.
Okay, now we're going to get into the portion that we have worked with Chart on and created this fantastic survey. All of the participants received their own copy with their own benchmarks. So thank you for all of those that did participate, because that's the way we get this data. So please participate the next time you see this, so we can make sure it's even more robust. So let's look at the numbers and what we saw in change in training expenses. What we found is over half the companies had an increase over last year in their training expense. And a lot of that is from high labor costs. And we're seeing labor costs go up and up. We're also saw that a third of companies said that staffing for their training departments increased. So we're seeing more people in the training department and rising labor costs increasing spend. Training budget allocation is kind of interesting. We start to look at unit level, front of the house and the back of the house, and you're looking at this from a difference between restaurants in the blue, hotels and lodging in the green. And where I really want to pay attention to is that unit level management position. So we in restaurants tend to spend a little bit more money in our front in the house and the back of the house and our hourly, where hotels tend to spend a little bit more in their management. Colby, what do you think about this from a hotel perspective?
I think we've been able to identify in hotels one of the key success factors of how profitable and how well that property is going to be run is the general manager and department heads that are around him. So most of the major flags that are out there, you think of Hilton, Marriott, Hyatt, Best Western, Drury, any of the major companies that are out there, most have requirements for new general managers to attend anywhere from a 5-day to a 3-week training for general managers. And the idea there is, one, to give them some general skills training. And many of them have previous experience, but it's also to orient the general managers to the brand as well, the different tools, resources, rules, and requirements that are there. So I think that you're seeing that is in here as well. I think most major flags would say that investment is well worth the money and the time. Helps reduce turnover in that general management level, but also helps set that new manager up for success.
Yeah, that's great. The next question that I think is interesting that we covered in this survey is, what department does training report to? And there's been a lot of changes over the last couple of years in who you all are reporting to. HR is down 6% over 2015, but we're seeing a 5% increase in reporting directly to the president and CEO. I think that is great progress and pretty impressive. So congratulations to all of you there. Operations is also getting more tied into training. And I think it's really interesting is that there's now 2% of us that are reporting into marketing. So when we talk about employment brand and the brand overall, there are some companies that are thinking that all falls under the one marketing umbrella, which is kind of interesting. Colby, do you have any insights on the hotel side on this?
Yeah, we're starting to see the same thing from our organizations. I mean, obviously we have the kind of the parent companies, and then we have the actual individual properties. I think I can speak more to the parent companies, and I think we're seeing some of the same shifts away from HR. In our organization, Best Western, our training department does report up through operations. But interestingly, I talked to a couple people who have shifted over into the marketing department, and anecdotally, they shared with me that they're really looking at it like holistically. What is the brand value proposition? What is the differentiation, both for the internal and external guests? Marketing is the department that can help us understand who our internal and external guests are, and marketing is the department that can help us message and attract both internal and external guests a little bit better.
That's interesting. Kind of your position in itself, Colby, is a little bit marketing related too, which is interesting.
I like to think I have a foot in both sales and marketing and operations.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's impacting your business in a really positive way. So that's an interesting way to look at it. So these are two different graphs that we're looking at. We're looking at change in number of people in training department versus last year, and then change in total training expenses versus last year. 50% of hotels and 37% of restaurants increased the number of people in training. And then when you look at training expenses from last year, hotels increased for 80%. 80% of them increased, while only 53% of restaurants have increased. So interesting, again, hotels look like they're getting a little bit more investment on the training side than hotels.
So some of that also has to do with the expansion in certain markets where continents like Africa and some of the areas in South America and in Europe that are hot markets are needing a little more investment in training in both just the soft skills, but as well as translations is one of the other things we're seeing. And I think that plays into some of the next information, and it's where we're spending the investments in hotels.
Yeah, that's really interesting when you think about it from a global perspective. So where is all this money going that we're spending more of? It looks like we're increasing spend for external resources. So 64% of restaurants and 75% of lodging said that spends are up. And this is for training off the shelf, third-party vendors, e-learning. So all of these spends are pretty much up. Only 13% and 36% relative have said that there's no change in restaurants and hotels. So that leads us to e-learning, and this has always been a hot topic every time I come to CHART, and I've been going for years. There's been a lot of talk about e-learning, and it seems to be becoming more and more important. So 76% of companies this past year said that they expected e-learning training solutions to increase in 2017. So I remember when we first did this, there were just few and far between people using e-learning, and now we're looking at 76% of the respondents said that they plan on either using a solution or increasing the solution in 2017. So how does this all matter? And we take a lot of this data, and there's a whole lot more data when you start to dig into the report, and the report is going to be available. I know Don is going to share a little bit more information on that towards the end, but we wanted to share the highlights with you at least in this webinar and open it up to questions. So the aha moment that we always have is training and development matters. Great news. So why does it matter? Ongoing tech and systems training, we found, equals lower turnover. So those companies that are investing more in technology and providing training around it are seeing lower turnover numbers. It's actually a 20% difference between those that are offering it and those that are not offering it. When we look at e-learning, and going back right to e-learning, what we're finding is that those companies that are offering a larger percentage on ongoing training via e-learning are also seeing lower management turnover. So companies that are offering 20% or more of their ongoing training are seeing 18.3% in turnover versus no e-learning at all at 34.5%. And that's a 16.2% decrease in offering more e-learning capabilities. The next slide is something I know Donna and I and Colby are all really, really passionate about, and this is supervisory skills. We talk a lot about it at TDN2K. We see a lot of it in our data and our numbers that management matters. And not just managers that know how to open and close a restaurant, but managers that really know how to lead. And so we're seeing more and more focus on supervisory skills for management and it making an impact on the business. So companies that offer more than 5% of supervisory skills are seeing 20% in turnover versus no time spent in the topic. Let's just talk about operations and how to run a business. We're seeing 39%. So Donna, I know you're really passionate about this piece. Is there anything that you want to share with the audience on this part?
I think one of the things that's important for those of us who really lead and influence training time and spend as professionals. Oftentimes people don't quite know what to ask for, and I think one of the challenges that we've seen in conversations through CHART members as well, if you kind of look back over the past 5 to 7 years, we kind of went through a window of time where there wasn't a lot of necessarily promotion or rapid expansion, and then it suddenly ramped up. And so we pulled out a lot of kind of that tier 1, tier 2, maybe hourly leader in development now into manager positions. And I think one of the big challenges that we have on the training side is not only to look at the trends, but also to come back and say, okay, is how we're approaching the skill gaps and needs relevant and important for our current employee base. And I think when we talk about skills training for management, it's really increasingly important as we work with first-time jobbers, new to industry, or a large pool of inexperienced leaders, because in many cases we find we're paying premium dollar today for a manager with less experience, perhaps, or less background than we were to get that, premium dollar for a more skilled candidate or more adept candidate maybe 7 to 10 years ago. And so the bridge is shorter because we don't have as much time for people to kind of learn the skills maybe as we have in the past. And there's really a call for assessing how do we meet those demands today. And I think that people are really the point of differentiation. And Melissa, to your point, you said it very, very well. It really is more now than opening and closing. The complexity of business and, frankly, the expectations of not only our guest base but our employee base have certainly been evolving. And it's really important as learning and development professionals that we take a hard look and ensure that our learning methodologies are evolving with the need. Thank you, Melissa.
Donna, that's a really interesting point. I think one of the things we're seeing reflected in the hotel side of things, when we get to that, not the line manager, the shift manager, or even the department head, when we get up into that general manager, assistant general manager component, this idea of management training really plays in from an incentive part. Managers are looking to their organizations to say, how are you developing me as a person? How are you going to help give me the skills and experience that I can take my career to the next level? And for us in the hotels, we're seeing that is almost an expectation of people. So if as a hotel or a hotel company, we're not offering a pathway for management skills and management training, and to help sharpen the saw and improve their skills, they will leave and find a company who will. They're looking at it as an investment in their future.
And I think that's across all lines. You look at ourselves internally as well, and that's all what we all want, right? One last piece to this is companies that are offering HR training to managers. So this is another aspect, topics like harassment and diversity, which we're seeing more and more become really, really important and are sensitive subjects that our managers really need to know how to handle. Those companies that are offering more of that, we're seeing it really relate to management turnover. So those that are spending no time at all are at 31.5% versus those that are spending 10% or more. There's a big difference here. So I think, you know, Donna, you said it really well too. Is that it's not just running an operation. We're really talking about building and designing leaders that can lead within and get people excited about working there. So I know our time is up. I think we have a poll on final thoughts and why we do it. I think we're going to share our final thoughts. Is that right?
We are. So a couple of just in our next 10 minutes or so together, we've got some Q&A opportunities. So if you were saying, okay, I want to process some of this information, I have some questions, please go ahead and enter them into the question bank at the right. And we'll work through some of the key questions that we've had throughout the webinar, and of course, those now coming in. And then kind of for calibration, Melissa, Colby, and I are very interested overall in this webinar. What was beneficial for you? Because we're kind of feedback junkies. You can multi-select, but we just kind of want to get a beat and make sure that we're missing your needs and creating value for your time in joining us for the webinar. And so while some of you are thinking through questions and some are kind of thinking through and processing the content that we covered, Melissa, can you give us just a couple of closing thoughts, and Colby as well?
Sure.
And then we'll go to Q&A.
You know, I think the big closing for me is that if we can continue to focus on that service experience, I think you're going to win. I think that best-in-class companies that are doing it really well and deciding not to cut corners when it comes to training and when it comes to providing incredible service. Think about things like companies that I admire, like Chick-fil-A, who spend a lot of time, a lot of energy on that service experience and what it looks. They're going to win. And then I also think that you guys have a really great potential to become a bigger and bigger role and voice in the employment branding experience. And that really, really matters to the bottom line. So I'm excited about where training is going. I'm excited about the technology that's being adapted in your organizations. And I think there's a lot of great potential and a lot of runway to see really best-in-class companies shine in these areas.
Colby, how about for you? Thank you, Melissa.
You know, I have turned into such a data nerd over the last couple of years that I think we all know where the seat is at the table and how important it is, especially the people that are taking time out to participate in that and be on the webinar. But I think any of the metrics that we can start to track through some of those loyalty measurements, some of the service measurements, and then be able to put some dollars to it, really does allow us to make the case up into the C-suite to help carve out a bigger seat at the table. And I think some of the metrics that are available out there are now starting to catch up to what we've already known as trainers and as training professionals for decades. We're now starting to get some things that are smart enough to help us show the impact for the first time.
Very nice, thank you. So just kind of in our last few minutes together, you've done a great job answering the bulk of our questions as we went through, but a little bit of just detail and background is, you know, with the trend in teenagers looking for employment going down, any input on why recruiting teens for part-time work? Like, is there any, here's the magic on getting those young people looking for work to come work for us? Well,
I think it's a tough market for that area. I'll do a shameless plug here for an organization that the National Restaurant Association Educational Foundation has, and it's called the ProStart program. It's a school to career program in high school. These kids are learning and training to have these skills to work in hospitality. They're learning knife skills. They're getting ServSafe certified. They're learning about management. It's amazing to me that this program in Texas alone has over 25,000 students that are learning about our industry. I would start there. Start to call your state association and ask them about ProStart program and how you can get plugged in, because there's a lot of really great students that are learning about our industry right now that we're just not taking advantage of.
Awesome. Additional, just kind of some background. Early on, Melissa, you gave us some correlation between service and kind of outcomes. What at TDN2K, when you say here's the service score, what are you measuring, or what does that represent for you?
Yeah, so that's a net value score. So we take all the positive and all the negative mentions, and we do net positive minus net negative and get that sentiment score. So how positive are those scores?
Thank you very much. And then did we have just a kind of a litmus test on how much managers who are leaving for better compensation, better offer, are leaving for? Is it a big swing, a little swing? Do we know anything about that?
You know, I'll tell you that people report members know, and the reason why is because we track that, and we track it down to the DMA level. So are you paying in the 5th or the 95th percentile, and what does that look like? So some of our people report members are really honed in. Are they losing their employees on dollars and cents, or is it really thousands of dollars? That's why metrics matter, because sometimes you're scratching the head thinking that you're paying within means. But I think too, we're seeing in hourly that cents matter. And I think what we're seeing too is that in hourly people, where you're not offering guaranteed hours, you're doing 30 hours or less. A lot of these people have to work 2 or more jobs. Job security with guaranteed hours, where they might be paying a nickel or a dime more, makes it really, really easy to jump ship and go next door.
Thank you. Well, so we still have a couple of questions, and I'm going to share a resource for more information or readout for those of you who are still having some conversation, which is awesome. Engagement in this webinar has been outstanding, and I can't appreciate you enough. If you'd like more information, number one, if you're a chart member company and participated with the survey, you do have access to the full survey results. Secondly, I think, you know, one of the resources where people say, is there kind of an infographic or something I can print and share? It is available and published on the chart website. As I mentioned at the beginning, this presentation is coming to you in PDF with an invitation to participate with survey. You can get more detail there or reach out to us at Chart. And this just in, we had a little bit of conversation. The full survey results are available to members who participated in the survey, but the interest is so high, while it will not be, the detailed results are not distributed publicly for the many members and attendees on today's webinar, we will include an overview of additional survey results to respond to some questions like correlating management and hourly turnover, et cetera. So with great appreciation, thank you for joining this call today. We value your feedback with the post-survey feedback link. You'll find attachments then, and we look forward to you joining our next chart webinar. Thank you.